don't have Israel's mindset because it'll get you terrible results. And we saw this from the Israelites themselves. See, Israelites were stubborn, they were complaining. Complaining is terrible. And God showed how bad it was by killing 23,000 people in one day because they complained. And complaining isn't just against the person you're complaining to or the circumstance you're complaining about. Complaining ultimately is against God. But that was their mindset. Another thing that they had was doubt. They doubted God. And one way to see doubt is focusing on the evidence that denies your belief. For example, if I believe I'm a good basketball player, but I had a bad game, I shot like 5 for 19 from the field, well, that's evidence to point to that I'm not good at basketball. And when I focus on it, it brings within it a sense of doubt in my ability. And that's what Israel seemed to do. See, they saw God part the Red Sea. They saw God do all these great things, but they chose not to focus on it. Instead, they focused on what they did not have. Man, we're thirsty. Man, we need bread. We need food. Man, we don't have meat to eat. They focused on this. And by not focusing on God, they brought doubt to themselves about God's ability to supply for them. And that's the mindset we have to run away from if we're going to make better progress. We can't be stubborn. We can't be complaining. And we have to not doubt. So how? How do we overcome this mindset? We do this. We choose to focus on something else. See, Israel, when they focus on Egypt, that produced a greater awareness of Egypt because focus brings with it awareness. For example, there's two aspects in life we can choose to focus on: the positive aspects and the negative aspects of life. And whatever we focus on becomes more aware of. That's why we see positive people and negative people. It's a product of what they're choosing to focus on. Same with Israel. By focusing on Egypt, they become more aware of the positives of Egypt, such as they had food to eat, like cucumbers and meat, and they had different things there in Egypt. So they desired the very place that enslaved them because of their focus on the benefits of that place. And I find that so interesting that you go back to the place that enslaved you, but we do the same thing. Man, I remember when I had that drug before. Man, I had that relationship before. Man, I remember when I was younger, I didn't have the results I wanted, but I was able to play video games when I could. We focus on the very thing that kept us away from making progress in our lives. And by focusing on it, we become aware of it, and that produces a greater desire for it. Why? Because we have energy towards it. See, focus leads to awareness. Whatever you focus on, you become more aware of. And there's two aspects of something we can focus on: the positive aspects of it and the negative aspects of it. And that gives us a great awareness of it and a greater desire for or against that thing. So going back to Israel and Egypt, Israel focused on the positives of Egypt. Man, we had food to eat. Man, we had meat to eat. So as they focus on that, they become more aware of the positives of Egypt, and that gave them a greater desire to go back to the very place that enslaved them because of their focus. In the same way, we focus on things that destroy us. We focus on, man, that drug was so good. Man, I remember that relationship was so good. That was pushing me away from God. Man, I remember those video games. Whatever it is that enslaves us, that brings us into bondage, by focusing on the positive of it, we become more aware of it, and that gives a greater desire for the very thing that keeps us in bondage. What they need to do is reframe that focus. Look on the negatives of Egypt. Man, we were slaves. We were slaves for 400 years. We were slaves. Our children were slaves. We had to throw our kids in the river to die because Pharaoh commanded it. If they focus on that, they're not going to desire Egypt anymore, and that's going to push them towards the promised land. But because of their focus, they not only doubted God, they desire to be slaves in the very land that had them in captivity. So what do we need to do? We have to focus on the negative aspects of what we don't desire, and that builds dread. Dread is the energy I get from having a negative expectation. And instead of a positive expectation, this gives us energy not for the outcome, but against the outcome we're choosing to focus on. For example, if there's a food I don't want to eat, such as cookies, let's say, because it'll make me fat, I can frame it through dread. I said, man, these cookies are going to make me fat. These cookies are going to keep me away from my goals, and I'm not going to look in shape. Well, by having all these negative expectations towards eating a cookie, I'm building energy against eating that cookie, and it gives me a desire not to eat it, greater motivation not to eat it, and more discipline to act in that way. So how can we build a more productive focus? How can I direct my thoughts towards a specific outcome? Well, one thing we can do is direct our thoughts on God. I love the story of the three men who went before the king of Babylon. See, the king of Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar, he built a statue that was like as tall as a 9-story tower. Like it was tall and it was completely made of gold. And he made a command that everyone needed to bow before the statue. But three men said, hey, we're not going to bow before the statue. So they brought for King Nebuchadnezzar, and King Nebuchadnezzar gave them one more chance. He's like, hey, if you do not bow, you're going to be thrown into a fire. Now, these three men could have focused on the fire and said, man, this fire is hot. I don't want to be thrown in the fire. I'm going to die. They could focus on that. Or what they did was they focused on God. They said, man, we don't need to answer you in this matter. God is able to deliver us from this fire. But even if he doesn't, we're not going to bow down. What happened there? Well, they focused on God and they had a better perspective. Their perspective was, yo, I'm seeking to please God. I'm not seeking to please men. And when we have that perspective on life, it doesn't matter the outcomes we get. We already know to direct our focus because our success is not based upon our outcome. It's based upon the input of being pleasing to God. See, when your goal is to please God, you should already know where to direct your focus. Why? Because the scriptures tell us things that are pleasing to God. God's will is for us to be thankful. He wants us to be joyful. So focus on those things, not negative things. In fact, God lays out what we should be meditating on in scripture. Philippians 4:8 says, finally, my brethren, where things are true, where things are noble, where things are just, where things are pure, where things are lovely, where everything is a good report. If there's any virtue or if there's anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. So he lays out 8 things that we should meditate on. And if you're not meditating on these things, my question is why? Why? Well, what else is more profitable to focus on? Because when we focus on what God wants to focus on, we get the natural output of that obedience. And this seems to be the mindset of Joshua and Caleb. See, before they entered the promised land, God sent out 12 spies to go and search it out, see how it is, how the land is. So they went and they saw the same exact thing, all 12 of them. They saw how it was fruitful, how it truly was a land flowing with milk and honey. They saw the same people in the land. They saw the same facts. However, when they came back, they gave 2 different reports. 10 of them gave a bad report because they chose to focus on the wrong thing. They saw the people in the land, like, oh, these people are giants and we're like grasshoppers in their sight. They focused on the people of the land and that made them have a sense of doubt that they could enter the land and conquer it. But Joshua and Caleb, 2 good spies who saw the same exact people, they focused on something else. They focused on God's ability to deliver them from the people or conquer that land nonetheless. So you can look at the same facts. 2 people can have the same information given, but because of their focus on the positive or negative, they produce a different outcome for themselves, a different sense of belief, a different mindset. And that gets them better results. If we apply the same thing to our lives, it wouldn't matter what circumstance we come across, what trials enter our life, anything that happens to us, we can always choose to focus on the positive and become more aware of that. And that leads to better actions and gets us better results. Why? Well, when I train myself to focus on the positive, I become a more positive person. And naturally, my actions will have alignment with the identity that I see myself as. But when I don't do that, I'm more emotion driven. See, an emotion is an automatic reaction. We can't always control it. For example, if someone like hits me in the head, I'm gonna have the emotion of, anger or frustration rise up oftentimes. That is my emotion. Now, my feeling is when I become aware that I feel angry, I feel frustrated. That I also can't always control. But what I can control is my response to that. Do I choose to respond in alignment with my anger and frustration and like hit the guy back who punched me in the face? Or do I choose to have an inconsistent response and I respond in a positive way? I forgive the person. I turn the other cheek. Well, when I respond in a positive way, despite my internal state, my emotions saying go this way, my flesh saying going this way, well, now I'm going to become a better person as I do that consistently. It wouldn't matter my circumstance and my emotions. I'm going to always have the ability to have a good response. But if I don't do that and I'm driven by emotions, some days I feel good, some days I feel bad. So my responses are inconsistent because I'm focusing on how I feel rather than what I want the outcome to be. And that seems to be the case with so many people. They focus on how they feel. They focus on the obstacle. They focus on the wrong thing when we can determine what we focus on. What is focus? Well, focus is directing your thoughts towards a target, and you get to choose the target you focus on. But because we have so many inconsistent targets, good this way, bad this way, and we focus on it, we get poor results. People talk about how God blesses them for obedience, but sometimes the blessing is simply the natural output of the obedience they're putting in. When you follow God's commands, it leads to better results than going your own way. So the blessing is the better results that naturally follow obedience to God. And we can see that again with the Israelites. They chose to go their own way. They tested God 10 times in the wilderness. They kept going their own way when God was trying to direct them to something else. He had a promised land for them, but they wanted to go back to the very place that enslaved them because of their focus, because going their own way, leaning on their own understanding and not trusting in God. But when we trust in God, we obey God. When we obey God, we get the natural output of obedience to God. Going back to the story with the 3 men who chose to disobey King Nebuchadnezzar in obedience to God, God saved them. That was the output of what they did. God chose to bless them for what they done. And that's what we need to do. Whether or not God saves us from the fire, we can choose to obey God because that always leads to a better outcome. See, one thing I noticed, I'm 20 years old, and I finally figured out, I figured out that sin is not worth it anymore. Like, it's not worth the pleasure. It's not worth the fleeting, like urge I get. It's not worth anything. It's just sin, and it's never worth the price it costs. The price of displeasing God is never worth that cost anymore. And we can see that with the Israelites, but don't have their mindset that they're okay with displeasing God if it means going their own way. And eventually God says, okay, you want to go your own way? Okay, go, and I'm not going to take you to the promised land. For 40 years, they walked through the wilderness. When it was like an 11-day journey that took them 40 years because they disobeyed God. They didn't focus on God and believe God. So God let them be hardened in their desires. And that led them to get worse results. They're not choosing to have Israelites mindset, which is don't be stubborn, don't complain, don't doubt. Choose to focus on God and what's pleasing to Him, and they'll get you better results. So thank you guys for watching. If you like this type of content, feel free to subscribe. And hopefully I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching.